All stations, this is MRO Systems on InSight Ops. At this time, we can confirm that MRO DSN X-band lost the signal due to MRO relative slew as expected.
EDL-COM, MRO phase lead on InSight Ops. At this time, the Electra open loop recording sequence should be loaded at this time.
Thank you, MRO.
All stations, this is DDL phase lead on InSight Cord. I wanted to point out that you may have noticed that our verification calls based on X-band data are lagging several minutes behind the procedure, and this is expected. This is a delay that we were expecting. When we switch to UHF, we expect the delay to disappear, but just as a heads up.
All stations and systems, we can confirm we are entry minus 20 minutes. EDL nav 2 has been initiated. The star tracker has been powered off.
EDL Com, Marco Bravo has slewed to EDL bent pipe mode.
Okay. Marco, clarify. Slew to inertial or started bent pipe?
Slew to appropriate attitude for bent pipe. Bent pipe mode will be entered shortly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Copy. EDL Com, Marco Com. Marco B has entered bent pipe mode. Marco Alpha has completed its slew to inertial attitude.
Thank you, Marco.
EDL Com, MRO Electra, and InSight Ops. At this time, we expect that the open loop recording has started.
Thank you, MRO. InSight Systems, EDL Com
Go ahead.
on InSight Cord. At this time, MRO will have loaded their Electra sequences. Marco is expecting carrier lock at any time. Marco B is reported there in bent pipe. Still waiting on A.
Copy that. Thank you.
For Science report, UHF carrier detected.
EDL Com, Marco Alpha is in bent pipe mode. Marco Bravo has locked on the carrier. Marco Alpha has also locked on carrier.
Systems Ace on InSight Cord. As expected, the DSN has LOS for InSight Expand.
Copy that. Thank you. All station InSight Systems on InSight Cord. DSN has lost the X-band signal from InSight, indicated expected cruise stage separation. Standing by for UHF signal acquisition via Marco or Radio Science.
We are about 5 minutes from entry and have confirmation we've lost the X-band signal from InSight. This was expected because we have transitioned from the antenna on the cruise stage to the UHF antenna on board the spacecraft. Ground stations have detected the UHF signal and Marco has locked on the signal. This confirms that InSight is transmitting UHF signals as expected. InSight telemetry through the Marco relay is not expected until about 2 minutes before entry. The vehicle has also performed the turn to entry maneuver. The vehicle is turning away from a sun-pointing attitude and oriented itself to enter the Martian atmosphere.
I'm David Curley in Washington. Good afternoon. We are getting ready for a little bit of history a long way away from Earth on the planet Mars. NASA preparing to land its latest vehicle headed toward Mars. It's in its final descent toward the planet, and we have coverage for you all afternoon, live from NASA at the JPL and also from the planetarium in New York, to give you a sense of how the world is watching this mission. This is a probe that's going to tell us about what is inside of Mars. And it's going to be a very exciting few minutes as it goes from space through the atmosphere and onto the surface. My colleague Clayton Santel is at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out in California. Clayton, I can tell that the excitement is building out there already.
Yeah, David, they have been very, very excited. In fact, when we talk to some of the project managers and some of the project folks, they're almost speechless in how excited they are. But they are also pretty nervous because if you look at the history of Mars exploration, especially when it comes to Russia, they have not had good luck. In fact, only about 40% of all missions to Mars have actually succeeded. The rest have failed. But I want to just turn here and show you, right behind me here is a mock-up of the Mars InSight lander. It's about the size of a large SUV and the real one took off back in May from Vandenberg Air Force Base here in California. It has now traveled about 300 million miles, and if all goes according to plan, we'll touch down here really in the next few minutes. And we've started to get some updates from Mission Control. This 7 minutes of terror that you may have heard about, that basically this craft, because of the communication delay from Mars to Earth, there is no, as one scientist put it, there is no live joysticking this mission. You can't control it in real time. It all has to be automated. It all has to be on autopilot. And so that is what's happening now. And in just the last few minutes, we have started basically to get into that 7 minutes of terror. The cruise stage has now separated from the lander, and the lander will then begin this turn toward. They want to orient it properly so that the heat shield is facing forward. Obviously, it is going to be facing some huge, really, really high temperatures, almost 3,000 degrees, which can melt steel. So they have to orient it properly. And then this whole sequence of events is starting to unfold now, where the back of the lander will separate. The heat shield will eventually separate, a parachute will come out, retro rockets will fire, and it will slow that lander from a speed of 12,000 miles per hour, more than 12,000 miles per hour, to 5 miles per hour in just about 6.5, 7 minutes, hence the term 7 minutes of terror.
I'd actually call it 7 minutes of blackout because they won't know what's going on. It won't be able to transmit. Clayton will be back with you in just a second. So a lot of folks watching around the world, as we are here at ABC News. And our Maggie Rulli is in New York at the planetarium, where she can tell us what the situation is like there.
David,
Maggie?
There are more than 100 people here right now at the Museum of Natural History in New York City waiting for this landing. And what I love is that there have just been people milling about all day. If you can see some of them, the crowd goes all the way in here. It's packed, people to people deep. And what I love is that many of them are sitting in chairs. And David, they're so into this that I was actually trying to chat with some people earlier, and someone shushed me. They told me to stop talking because they're really listening to what is happening on that screen. Now, earlier we heard from a meteorite expert. We also heard from a visual artist expert. And now they're live streaming NASA right behind me here. So it's definitely exciting. But I have to say, I'm kind of blown away by how people are so closely paying attention to what's happening. Again, actually shushing me because they wanted to focus on what was going on behind them. So right now it's still kind of a waiting game. Everyone is really rapt by what's happening on the screen, waiting to find out what's going to happen with this Mars lander. And heck, David, I'm waiting with them. We're super excited.
It is very exciting. Maggie, thank you very much. We'll get back to you. We hope to see a picture from this lander if it successfully lands and is able to send back a picture. We'll talk about some of the science and what we hope to gain from this probe in just a little bit. But let's listen in to a little bit of this tension that's going on at NASA now as they wait to find out whether this long-term project comes out successfully.
And peak deceleration. The next big step is parachute inflation.
And you can see that on our timeline on the bottom of the screen. The next event is parachute deploy.
InSight is now traveling at 1,000 meters per second.
very close.
Once InSight slows to about 400 meters per second, it will deploy its 12-meter diameter supersonic parachute. The parachute will deploy nominally at about Mach 1.7. Standing by for parachute deploy.
So you're hearing these steps, and it's really exciting. What we've seen already happen is that basically the vehicle turned so it could come through the atmosphere. It has to do that at an angle, as Clayton was explaining earlier, and then that actually slows it down significantly as it gets into the atmosphere. They're very happy they have parachute deploy. And now, two really exciting things, Clayton. Let's talk about this. They're going to jettison the heat shield and then basically jettison the parachutes, and then we get to see some rockets, or hear some rockets, supposedly.
Yeah, that's right. They have to use explosive charges to basically blow away the heat shield. They'll use charges to get rid of the parachute as well, and the lander will actually have to maneuver so that it doesn't land on the heat shield, and so the parachute doesn't land on the lander. So there's a couple of things that'll happen in that process. As the parachute has now come out, and then we're now hearing that the radar is now activated, which is a good sign. That means that the lander is now sensing its speed and distance from the ground and adjusting. Right, exactly, trying to find the right place to land. And we can talk a little bit more about the landing zone in a bit, but it wants to be in an area that is free of rocks, free of, too steep an incline. And so they've worked very hard to try and figure out a very flat, very boring place to land. That's where they want to be.
Yeah, but we have very good movement so far. We've had the good signs that it actually turned itself, came through the atmosphere correctly, slowed itself down, the parachutes deployed, that worked correctly. The question is, they're excited again. Was that the heat shield that we just had jettisoned?
Was that the heat shield?
Interruption on Marco Alpha and Marco Bravo.
Lander separation. So
Lander
that's
separation
lander
commanded. Altitude 600 meters. Gravity turn.
Yeah, so it's very close to landing on Mars.
Meters.
Let's listen into these final seconds.
300 meters. 200 meters. 80 meters. 60 meters. 50 meters, constant velocity. 37 meters. 30 meters. 20 meters. 17 meters, standing by for touchdown.
They're standing by for touchdown.
Radar is locked on the ground. Parachutes deployed. Standing by for lander separation.
Touchdown confirmed.
You're behind. Touchdown.
There you have it. You saw the high fives at JPL, the applause, also at the planetarium in New York. InSight is on Mars.
This never gets old.
No, it doesn't, Rob.
Clayton, we're going to have several minutes now with the successful landing that we can talk a little bit about some of the science here and what this little vehicle is going to do. There's actually quite a bit to talk about here. I actually have to say before we go on, I love some of the choreographed high fives and elbowing there. That was quite fun with the JPL engineers in Pasadena. So Clayton, this is fantastic.
It's a bit like the Super Bowl.
Yeah, for them it is a Super Bowl. We have landed this probe on Mars. That is a huge feat in itself, 6 months on its space travel to get there. Now comes the work of why we sent it there, which is to learn more about what's inside Mars. Explain a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. So the hard part is over. They've landed on Mars, and now it's time for the science. And one of the reasons they want to study Mars, we've sent missions to Mars before to study the surface of Mars, to study the atmosphere, but we've never really looked inside Mars. And one of the reasons scientists want to do this is because back 4.5 billion years ago, Earth and Mars were very similar. Their atmospheres, they both had atmospheres, liquid water. They were very similar. But somewhere along the line, about 1 billion years into Mars life, it changed dramatically, and they want to figure out why. So this is actually the first probe that will look inside the planet, and I'm going to actually have the camera zoom in here a little bit. You can see two of the instruments that are going to be deployed here on the surface of Mars. The first one that kind of looks like that octagonal or hexagon box, that is a seismometer, and what they're going to use that for is to measure Mars quakes and vibrations from things like meteor strikes, and that will help paint a picture of the interior of Mars to basically tell them how the planet formed, and it's, you know, it's almost like a time capsule, really, because Mars stopped changing about 1 billion years into its life, and they want to look back and see if there are anything they can learn about how Earth formed back in that time. And then also, there's another experiment here, the heat experiment, that is going to measure the amount of heat coming out of the core. And again, all of this is to basically paint a picture of the interior of Mars and try and figure out how Mars was formed, how Earth was formed. And it's also going to be helpful, they tell us, in looking for habitable planets outside of our solar system as well. All of the science is building up to that as well.
Still celebrating their JPL, and also we saw some shots from, it looked like it was New York City, maybe Times Square, where they're watching up on the big Good Morning America banner wall there in Times Square. Maggie Ruley's at the planetarium in New York. We saw a lot of jumping and screaming there, Maggie. They were very happy.
A lot of jumping and screaming. This is exactly what everybody wanted to see. Again, during those 7 minutes of terror, I was actually shocked. You could hear a pin drop in here. This place was absolutely silent. You can see there's, well over 100 people here, but as we were waiting to find out what happened, no one spoke a word. Everyone was just wrapped in waiting to see what was going to happen on screen. But the second that we did find out that all was okay, and you saw everyone high-fiving over at NASA, everyone here did the same thing. They were applauding and very excited. So certainly quite a few excited people. Many of them have been here for over an hour. I have a friend over here, Ben, right?
Hi, yeah.
Hey, Ben, I'll come down with you. You've been sitting for quite some time, waiting for this moment.
Right.
Was it as exciting as you thought it was going to be?
Was
Was it?
Yeah, it was great.
What did you think in those minutes when we didn't know what was going to happen?
A lot of tension. You could just see it in people's faces on the screen there, and you don't know how much they have riding on, how much time they put in. And it's just, it's just like, oh no, you don't know what the success rate's going to be, and just watching it, and it's just I don't know.
Well, it's coming. Everyone was so silent in here when it happened, and then when we saw that it was a success, though, I loved that jump of energy.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
What brought you out here today? Why wait here for
so long? I've wanted to come to the Hayden Planetarium for a long time, actually from Canada up north. So we were actually in New York just exploring. We had to fly out tonight, so I had to come here right before.
You spent your last day in the United States of America here cheering on NASA. Ben, good for you. All right, well, enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks,
we'll give a high five like they do at NASA. Right, sending a high five back to you as well, David. All right, David, see you around.
Thank you, Maggie. Thank you very much. We are seeing right now the first picture from InSight, apparently transmitted already back of it on the surface of Mars. Saw a round of applause from the folks at JPL. Looks like a couple of the engineers are actually trying to figure out exactly where they landed. Boy, Clayton, that was pretty quick that we got a picture back. We were expecting 4 or 5 minutes, and we at least have...
Very fast.
Yeah, very fast and very exciting for these engineers and everybody who's put so much time into this mission.
Yeah, and one of the reasons they're getting these images back so quickly is that in addition to InSight flying through space, it was actually trailed by two pretty brand new revolutionary pieces of technology called cube satellites, CubeSats, or MarsCo they called them. And these satellites were able to basically track in real time InSight as it landed and relay all of that information back. They're also helping relay some of these images we're seeing now, so that's why they're coming back so fast. And if you look at that image, it's a fairly plain looking landscape, and that is by design. From a geologic standpoint, if you're a geologist, you usually want to go where the action is. You want to go where there are canyons, where there are big rocks, where there are things to study, where water might have flowed. This is the exact opposite. They wanted a flat area where they could easily do something that they've never done before, which is to take that arm on the lander there, and it will actually, in the coming days and weeks, will pick the experiments up off of the deck there and put them down on the surface. So they wanted as few rocks as possible, as few obstacles as possible. And in fact, here at JPL, they have a spot where they will very closely study the landing zone. They'll get 3D pictures of the ground. They'll look all around with the 2 cameras that are on board, and they will recreate the landing site here on Earth in order to figure out the best spot to put all of these instruments, David.
We're getting a better sense of what this image is. It may not look like a lot to you, but it's great stuff for these engineers. That is the horizon of Mars, of where they have landed, and then they believe it's some debris. It's some debris that could have gotten on the lens or was still floating in the thinner atmosphere there in Mars. Before we go, and we're going to wrap this up since we have now seen the first image, I want to talk just one more second about those CubeSats, which you just mentioned, because these are the size of a briefcase. This is the future of satellites. We're going to geek out a little bit here, Clayton. They are just passing by, but they're the ones who transmitted this picture. But that's the future of what we're going to see with space travel, are these small little satellites that can travel hundreds of thousands of miles.
That's right. They didn't know whether these things were going to work. The mission is not dependent on these CubeSats. They made that very clear. But basically, what they got, this was gravy. These things worked. They worked exactly how they were supposed to. So now, like you said, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of them.
All right, and you've mentioned a lot of the science here. In essence, drill down into the surface of Mars. We want to know the temperature. We want to know whether there's seismic activity, whether there's any rattling, shaking, earthquakes, and also how thick the crust is and what is inside of Mars. I mean, this is the first time we're really going to get a sense of what's in that core of Mars.
Right, and I'll give you my one Mr. Wizard moment here with my props. One of the things that they're going to be studying, and I've got 2 eggs. One is hard-boiled and one is raw. So one of the other experiments that's on this lander is they're going to measure radio signals from the lander going back to Earth, and they'll be able to measure the wobble of Mars. Now, this is kind of what I'm going to show you here. This is a raw egg. You see how it spins? And I'm spinning this hard-boiled egg with the same amount of force. And see how much faster it spins. So basically, they are going to see how Mars spins, and that will be able to tell them whether the core is liquid or solid or some combination thereof. But that's how they're going to do it.
I think it's actually, we think about the rovers that we've seen such spectacular pictures. They've picked up samples, they've tested samples. It seems like with each mission, we learn a little bit more about this planet and its history.
A little bit more, and even in upcoming missions, the Mars 2020 mission is actually going to be a sample return mission. So they'll actually send a rover to Mars. It'll run around on the surface. It'll collect samples, much like we did on the Moon, and then eventually those samples will be brought back to Earth for study.
Pretty fun to be there, Clayton, today?
It is very cool. Actually, the first landing I covered here was in 1997, showing my age, for the Pathfinder landing, and it's always an exciting time. There were probably 300 or 400 invited guests that were here a while ago, so there's a watch party. Everybody's very excited. Everybody wants this to succeed, and yeah, the mood has been great. I mean, like I said, they were nervous, but they were optimistic that they were going to be able to pull it off, and they did.
As we should say, and we have not mentioned this so far, such a great success. Half of these missions have failed, so another success goes into the column for NASA. Clayton, thank you very much for your coverage there at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. We want to thank Maggie Rulli for her efforts at the planetarium. And let me give you the last words we've gotten from NASA. They say the vehicle, InSight, is happy. It's not complaining. So they're not getting any signals that something is wrong with InSight as it sits on the surface of Mars. And they called the landing and this whole mission so far flawless. They said it has been a perfect scenario. Very good news for NASA, very good news for space exploration. The probe InSight is on the surface of Mars, ready to start doing a lot of science. I'm David Curley in Washington. We thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed our landing on Mars.